Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I hope you are doing well. I hope you're keeping well in these tough times. I took a little break. Yes, I'm guilty of that. But we're back. We are still on the matter of how to become a UK barrister, basically, the path to becoming a UK barrister being called in England and Wales. So that's what my series has been on. If you haven't caught any of the videos, I advise you to catch up with the first couple of topics and conversations that I've already kind of had on here and the information I've given before you jump into this video. But it's also fine starting from this one because this one is a little more personal, it's less academic. Today's topic of conversation, or what I'm going to cover, has to do with the more personal side of the entire journey. I'm going to be talking about, firstly, about housing and accommodation for international students that want to navigate their way through that. I'll give you some of the tools that I had and as much information as I can give you as to just your general living costs, what you should be looking out for and what you should be kind of prepping for in advance. And also I will talk about, in this installment, the physical, mental, and emotional journey of law school. I will talk about my own experience, my own depressive period, dealing with anxiety over the last 2 years, or what was 2 years of my law diplomas, law degrees, whatever you want to call them. And so yeah, that's what this video will be about, just giving you kind of a peek into those two aspects, living and dealing mentally with the journey in law school, and hopefully I can, help you kind of not make the same mistakes that I did in this respect, and to equip you as little as I can for some of the challenges ahead, or the potential challenges ahead. So yeah, that's what we're going to cover. Okay, so let's talk about living in London as an international student, or just as a student in general. There are quite a number of costs that come up, but the major ones are accommodation, so rent, transportation, depending on where you are, and then just your general upkeep. So phone bills, internet bills, gym, groceries, what else? Medical bills, potentially, and those are about it. Those are the major ones. Of course, there's other costs that will come up that can come up as you go. It depends on your specific circumstance and who you are, but those are generally it. So for living in accommodation, most of the time that will be provided to you or for you by your provider, your GDL provider, your university. There tends to be campus housing as with anywhere else. So you have that option. The only thing is you have to figure out what the procedure and process for applying for housing is with your own university. There's no general way that goes, so I can't speak to that specifically. But some unis sometimes have specific accommodation for postgraduate students, which the GDL and the BPTC are postgraduate courses. So you might fall into that category. Some, it's just general housing for everybody, so you just need to figure out what the deadlines are, what applications look like, and then you just need to get that in on time. One thing you obviously have to consider is pricing, and that I think will play a big factor, or will be a deciding factor for a lot of people in the accommodation that they choose. But from my experience, it's a minimum of maybe £160 per week, and it's upwards of that. So that's per week, specifically per week, not per month. So you would find accommodation upwards of that. With campus housing, I find that campus housing in London, specifically central London, is a bit more expensive than other alternative options for housing. In areas like Manchester, Liverpool, it might be slightly different. So again, it depends on where in England you are actually undertaking your courses, but you will find that the price ranges or the prices for rent are different depending on the vicinity that you are in. So campus housing is the first option that you have. Second option, you can opt for private student accommodation. So there are quite a few entities and companies that have built residential accommodation specifically for students, and they're private. So some of them do have some of them are affiliated with certain universities, and so they provide private accommodation for those universities and are open to the other students of other universities as well. So private student accommodation is something that I opted for personally, just because I wanted to be able to determine what my space looked like a little bit more. I wanted flexibility with that. I also wanted to determine what area I was living in, because student housing is just in one place, but with private student accommodation, they're quite spread out across the zones, across London, so you can choose. And the companies usually have residents in different places. So one company, for example, could have buildings in London and in Manchester and in Liverpool. So usually when you stumble on the site, which I will talk about shortly, you can pick depending on where you're going. So private student accommodation was an option that I wanted, just because I wanted to kind of be away from campus. I wanted to differentiate between studying and like living a bit. So I chose private student accommodation. I also found that I got more space for the same amount that I would have paid if I had paid for campus housing. But with campus housing, I would have had a smaller space and probably had to share a living space. And I am quite nitpicky when it comes to cleanliness and a couple of other things. So I just didn't want to be burdened with having those discussions with roommates and such. So I opted for just private housing for myself, or a private studio for myself, I should say, and that worked for me. I wanted just the space and clarity to be able to think, to come back to my space and not have to deal with anything that I didn't want to, really, plainly to put it. That was really it. So decide for yourself. If you're a person that loves to live with other people, meet different people, then you're going to make your decision based on that. But private student accommodation and campus housing are usually the two options that you have for accommodation. Again, it's upwards of anything of like a decent space is upwards of anything, anywhere between like £165, like I said before. So that is per week. So you could find decent housing for something under like, let's say, 600 per month or more. You just need to really check those details. These are some of the websites that are available, but honestly, you can just type into Google student accommodation Liverpool, student accommodation Manchester, student accommodation London, and a bunch of sites and companies will come up. And the best way to go about narrowing them down will probably be to just look at Yelp reviews, look at Google reviews, because some students have reviewed some of these places, and then you can go off of that. From the reviews, you can really get a sense of where you will be living. Sorry, I don't know why I was stumbling, but you get a good sense of where you'll be living. You get a good sense of the internet conditions, whether internet is stable. Because when you're in private student accommodation, it's a bit different as when you're in campus housing. It's not that campus housing internet or Wi-Fi can't fail, but I feel like they're a bit more on top of it, and they're a bit quicker to fix issues than you might find in private student accommodation. So things like that, people talk about maybe noise levels, just residential help, whether you have security 24 hours. So there's a lot of different things that you can gather from reviews on Google or on Yelp of student housing to help make your decision. So yeah, that's really it in terms of accommodation. That's all you really need to know, but it's something you want to kind of work on in advance so that you are picking the best conditions and most suitable conditions for you. Bear in mind that you're going to be challenged mentally at every point during your academic journey. So I feel like it's very important for you to be in a living situation that is stable, that is welcoming, that is almost like a sanctuary. You know, where you live should be somewhere that you can go to rest as well as work, that you can find balance. So picking an area or a place or a building or a residence in which the level of stress is reduced, in which access to certain things is easy, will make your life and your journey a lot smoother over. Like, there's just things that you won't have to think about. There's just things that won't bother you. So it's something to pay attention to before you start your journey, basically. So you want to make the best decision for you, because trust me, it will play a role in just how you feel on a day-to-day. And you want to feel good, you want to feel calm. You don't want your space to be, again, filled with noise. So you might want to pay attention to whether your accommodation is near a tube track, for example. You know, the tubes are going in and out. Is that something that's going to bother you? Are you in an area where there's a lot of kids? Are you in an area where you have access to your Tesco's, your Asda's? Can you get your Nando's? Like, Nando's, I love Nando's. But can you get your Nando's? Can you get this and that? Just things. Are you able to run to a Boots or pharmacy down the road? Is that something that's further away? So it might seem like just nitpicky details that I'm pulling out, but again, it will make your life that much easier. Is there a gym nearby that you can go and blow off some steam, or do you need is your gym 30 minutes away? That's going to make a difference, again, over the duration that you're studying. So again, just take your time and make that decision as wisely as you possibly can. Reviews, look at a bunch. Price, rent, distance from your school is something you need to consider as well, and that will factor into the next cost that I want to talk about, which is transportation. So that's another cost that could be an issue or not for you, depending again on where you live. If you are on campus housing, that means you probably will be close to the buildings in which you're studying, or you might be on campus, so that might not be as much of an issue if you're not going in and out into town or into other parts of England. That might be something that isn't going to be a high priority for you, transportation costs, that is. But if you are, let's say, living 30 minutes to an hour away from where studying is happening or campus is, that's something that you might need to factor in, especially if you're doing private student accommodation that is not close to where you will be studying. Then you need to be taking into consideration transportation costs. And just for anyone that is, again, moving to London for the first time, or England, the country is divided into zones in terms of transportation. There's different zones, so the further apart the zones are, the more you're paying for transportation, whatever that is, whether that's bus, whether that's the tube, whatever that is. The further the zones are apart, the more that you're going to pay. So if you're studying in zone 1 and living in zone 4 or 5, you're going to be paying a lot more than someone that's studying in zone 1 and living in zone 2 or in zone 1 itself. So that's something that you want to factor in when you're picking where to live. Your transportation costs and your living costs are basically like this. You do have the option as a student for an Oyster card, which is a card that gives you a discount on travel as a result of being a student, so that's really great. So an Oyster card, it's called an Oyster card, so just look up an Oyster card and start looking at the details for applying for that. There is a process. You need to submit a picture online, you need validation from your university, and then the card is sent to you once you're in country and you're studying and everything has been verified. So that gives you a discount on just your trips. You can pay for that monthly, you can use it weekly, depending again on what works for you and how often you are actually traveling. You don't want to just put money into travel if you're not going to use you're not going to make use of the card and make use of what you've put on it. So you want to kind of figure out, once you know where you're living, that's something that you can then figure out. If you're living in the same zone as your university, then it might not be something that you necessarily opt for. But if you are living in the same zone as your university and you know that you're going to be traveling between zones quite frequently, an Oyster card is something that you want to consider. If you're driving, kudos to you, you're all good. You don't need any of this. So accommodation cost, rent cost, and then transportation costs. Other costs that could come up in your living costs are medical costs. Now, as international students, you do pay for I believe it's the IHS fee in your visa application. So that's to cover just generally being able to have like a general practitioner and all of that. So your very, very basic costs are covered for the year. However, depending on what reasons you're going to see your GP, or you need to actually see a doctor or some specialist, a medical specialist, it's going to vary in cost. So that's something, again, that's circumstantial. You're going to have to look into that. If you are a person that is taking prescribed drugs for any reason, you might want to look into where you are going to be able to get those drugs from, because sometimes GPs can prescribe certain medication, and then there's some that they can't, and there are medication that you can't get off of, let's say, the shelf in the pharmacy unless they are prescribed. So again, if you are on any prescribed medication, just start looking into that and just check if that's something that you would need to be getting either from like a specific dispensary, from the hospital, or you would need a prescription to get in a pharmacy. But simple off the top, like off the shelf, things like Panadol, paracetamol, cough syrup, eye drops, those are generally okay. But something like melatonin, for example, is not something that you just find hanging around the shelves of Boots or anything like that. So medical cost is something to consider, but again, the general fee is covered in your visa application. However, depending on what your condition is, that's going to determine how much you are spending on your medical costs. Then there's groceries. We all need to eat. You need to eat you need to be eating very well during this entire time. Please do not starve yourself. Do not just eat well, eat a balanced diet. Your brain will need it. Your body will physically need it. You will get tired. You will be pushed. You will be tested. So you need to make sure that you're eating well. So groceries are another cost that you want to be factoring in monthly or ahead of time. Maybe just figure out how much you think you want to be spending on groceries, and then obviously adjust that once you're in the reality and you know what you're eating and all of that. There's so many options for food all around, both takeout and meals that can be made at home. I will say, comparing the different cities that I've lived in, London is definitely one of the more expensive cities when it comes to takeout, and in my opinion there isn't that much variety. So if you don't like cooking, get to it now. Please start figuring out something. Thankfully, groceries are not too expensive, even in London Central itself. So you have farmers markets, you have your Lidl, your Asda, your Sainsbury's. So you can get a good amount of groceries per month for a decent price. And so you just need to plan accordingly to what works for you. Other costs are really depending on who you are, maybe the gym, but your internet and your phone bill are also going to be critical. If you are on campus, that is provided for you. When you're in private student accommodation, that is also generally provided for you, but you might have an issue with it, and that's why I mentioned looking at the reviews on that as well. If you have an issue with it, you are free to employ your own internet provider, but that's going to be an additional cost for you. So just looking at the different telephone providers or the different mobile providers, I don't even know what they're called, but the phone companies, looking at the different rates that they have monthly or weekly or bi-weekly, what works for you. So the only one I know is 3, honestly, that's all I can tell you. There's 3, there is Virgin, I think, and yeah, I'm not really sure what the other ones are, but looking into those companies now and just seeing what deals might work for you, what your cost and what your budget for your phone, you want your phone bill to be, what you want that phone package to include for yourself as well, is what you will need to be deciding. That's a cost you can start to factor in early on as well. And then that of the internet providers as well. You know, there's Talk. There's a few ones that's Virgin as well. So you want to look at kind of the rates that they have, if they have like student discount options as well. And yeah, I think those are the only costs. Again, I mentioned gym. That depends on you. You get benefits from being a student with certain gyms as well. So that's something you might want to look into. And I think it's actually critical for you to look into, because sometimes you will want to just punch a wall because of law school. And instead of punching the wall, maybe you can lift, maybe you can run on the treadmill, maybe you can go for a run if it's not cold. I'm not about running. I don't like running in the cold, so that's not really something that I do. But having some sort of outlet or hobby would be great for you. So looking into that, whether that has a cost on it or not. Also, universities do provide like different facilities for you to, get your workouts in and all of that. So a gym cost might not even be something that you need to bother about anyway. But those are the costs that all come to mind for me. Everything else is really your social and personal life, eating out, traveling, all of those things. Those are things that you can figure out as you go along, but these are the few that I definitely wanted to bring to your attention. And now let's move on to talking about anxiety and depression in law school. 2017, I could not get a proper night's rest. I could not sleep. If anything, I would be in bed just kind of lying there resting, or trying to calm my brain down, because it was just running. I was consistently thinking of the things that I had to do. I could not rest. I could not relax. It was a whole lot. And then I had a full-on mental breakdown. I had two, actually. I had two mental breakdowns. I had one at the end of 2017 when I was almost done with the GDL, and then I had one later in 2018 mid exams of the BPTC. So it requires